Hello, I'm Peter Freeth and I'm going to be speaking to you today about easily dealing with conflict and stress, something which everyone experiences in the workplace at some point in their careers, I think. Learning objectives for this session are going to be threefold. Firstly, understand the short and long-term effects of stress on you and on the people around you. Secondly, to manage demands on your time more easily. Time, priorities, pressures from time are going to be one of the most important factors in your level of stress. And finally, managing workplace conflict so that you can achieve win-win outcomes. I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche, but we'll get to that in due course. So firstly, understanding what stress actually is. Stress reduces your productivity and your performance. It shortens your life. Research has shown that constant, everyday, low level of stress can reduce your life by up to 20 years. And I think you'd agree that's quite a long time that you would quite like to hang on to. Stress caused by conflict in the workplace has been quite well researched. It reduces your business productivity. It increases absenteeism. It increases staff turnover. It reduces your personal productivity. It reduces the amount of sleep that you get and the quality of sleep that you get. That's very, very important in your mental health and your general health and well-being. And it reduces your cognitive capacity, so it actually impairs your ability to think straight. And that then can further compound the issues that are caused by the stress. So stress, it's important to understand what it is. It's a conflict of opposing forces within a system. And when that system is you, that energy, that conflict has nowhere to go. So you internalize it. Stress caused by conflict within the workplace, as I mentioned, has been specifically researched. It causes you to lose sleep, to not be able to think straight, to become unproductive, to increase your blood pressure. And increased blood pressure leads to all kinds of other health effects and unpleasant health effects as well. And it causes you to die at a younger age. And so that's just stress within the workplace caused by conflict with your colleagues, and I'm sure you've experienced that in your career, perhaps recently. Perhaps that's the reason why you're watching this video. So stress, as I said, is the result of opposing forces. In any system, stress will cause friction, and friction will eventually cause the failure of components. So whether it's a mechanical system or a biological system or a system of people like an organisation or a workplace, stress causes friction, causes lost energy. Now, would you drive your car with one foot on the accelerator and at the same time 1 foot on the brake? Of course you wouldn't. The result would be, would damage the car, it would break something. I mean, the brakes would burn out or the clutch would burn out, or something bad would happen to your car, and I'm sure you can imagine that. And you wouldn't do that, you wouldn't think to do that, it wouldn't make any sense. But you're quite happy to cope with that kind of situation at work, to internalize that conflict and the stress, and to put up with that kind of situation in the workplace. Stress is a mental health issue, and the government's recently announced some extra spending for funding mental health changes in the healthcare system to support people with mental health issues. Provision of workplace first aiders, mental first aiders, as well as physical first aiders, to recognise and deal with the signs of mental health. And stress and anxiety are recognised as symptoms or aspects of mental health issues. Workers with mental health issues, which again includes the regular stress and anxiety that you probably experience day to day, contribute £225 billion to the UK economy. That's over 12% of the UK's gross domestic product. That doesn't mean that you have to employ people with mental health issues. It means that you are already in your workplace surrounded with people who are experiencing mental health issues, just as much as you're surrounded by people experiencing backache or colds and coughs and flu and symptoms and so on. So it's that common. Early signs of depression, stress, anxiety, all of these things are a part of that figure. And all of those factors, those symptoms together, have resulted in almost 16 million working days lost, reported by the Office of National Statistics just a couple of years back, and you can be sure that figure is going to be increasing year on year. Fundamentally, your response to stress, everyone's response to stress, is to shut down, is to isolate themselves, is to shut yourself away, take yourself away from the different pressures that are causing the stress. The problem with that is that if you isolate yourself, if this stress is caused by conflict, conflicting priorities, conflicting demands and needs that you're experiencing in the workplace, the problem is that when you isolate yourself in any kind of relationship, you've now lost your ability to influence the factors that are causing the stress. So actually, although our first response is to isolate ourselves, it's actually counterproductive. It can actually make the stress much worse. So actually what we've got to do is counterintuitive. We've got to re-engage in order to be able to influence the factors that are causing the stress. We've got to avoid cycles of stress and self-medication. Almost everybody will experience stress in life, and almost everybody will self-medicate at some point. And what that means is you go home, you maybe have some chocolate on the way home, or you get home and have a glass of wine or a glass of beer. You have to go to the gym for a couple of hours to unwind from the day at work, or you have to sit at home and do nothing, just watch TV to unwind from the day at work. And it would be simpler, I think, if you just didn't get wound up in the first place. That would be preferable. It would save you a lot of time, save you a lot of money. People will go out and smoke, they'll drink more coffee, more tea, they'll argue more with their friends and family. These are all ways that we self-medicate in order to reduce that daily low level of stress that we experience. Fundamentally, the way to avoid all of that is to understand why you're taking on too much in the first place. Some people, it's about proving that they can manage it all. So, the cause of the stress fundamentally is you. It's not workload, it's not customers, it's not time pressures, it's not your boss. It's fundamentally your response to conflicting demands, because there's always too much for you to do in any day. You've got to get things from the shops, you've got to get somebody a birthday present, you've got to pay some bills, you've got to get to the bank, you've got to get to the post office, you've got to do all this work. So there's always more that you could do, but it's losing your ability to prioritize and losing that perspective that really contributes to the stress. So proving that you can juggle all of that, manage all of that, definitely a big issue for some people. And the thing to remember is that if you're the kind of person who's trying to prove that you can do it all, nobody said that you couldn't. You're not proving it to anybody. It's not helping. With some people, it's trying to prove that they're the best, that they can do more than everybody else, they can produce better work than everybody else, they can do something faster than everybody else, they can take on more, they can manage more. And proving that you're the best, if you're that kind of competitive person, again, the thing to remember is nobody said you weren't. Nobody cares. Nobody's judging you. It doesn't make any difference. It's futile. And some people, it's about proving that they're successful. Working hard in order to put a car on the drive for the neighbours to look at, not for you to enjoy. Or to live in a house in an area so that the right kind of people talk about you. Well, nobody's talking about you. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your success. They just care about, are they getting what they want out of life? They're not comparing themselves to you. And therefore, for some people who are driven by that need to show that they're successful, it's worth bearing in mind nobody's interested. Just do the things that make you happy. Have the things in your life that give you an enjoyable lifestyle and allow you to focus your time on the things that are important to you. So resolving stress now is very important to understand. If we're in a position where we're experiencing stress, how do we resolve that? Well, the first thing, as I said, is understanding why you're taking on too much in the first place. And what are you afraid will happen if you don't take on that workload? And if that happens, so if you're afraid you'll get into trouble or you'll disappoint somebody or you'll get fired from your job, if that happens, so what? Then what happens? What happens after that? And how important is it to you really? I mean, worst case scenario, if you're worried that if you don't take on this extra work, if you stop saying yes to everything, you'll get fired? Realistically, do you think that's true? Even if it is true, so what? Why would you want to carry on putting yourself through that every day? Doesn't make any sense. Stress is not caused by other people. Driving fast will not damage a car engine. It's lack of maintenance that will damage a car engine. Stress is caused by a barrier within you, and that barrier is quite simply fear. Fear of what will happen if you don't prove that you're the best, if you don't prove that you're successful, if you don't say yes, if you don't fit in and do the things that you think are expected of you. And that fear, that barrier, is what creates the stress. Fear of not being good enough, fear of being judged, fear of failure. When you acknowledge what that fear is, you take control of it. And when you take control of that fear by acknowledging it, no one can coerce you into taking on more work. A lot of the organisations that I work with have a culture that drives, for example, fear of failure. And there's a sense amongst managers that if they don't say yes, if they don't take on another project, if they don't do something over the weekend, if they don't work in the evenings, then they failed, and that's a bad thing. But the irony is nobody knows what will happen if they say no. And one manager, actually tried it 1 month. He was afraid of not hitting his targets, and he'd never missed a target. And 1 month he decided to test what would happen, and so he just allowed orders and things to go through the system. He didn't push anything. He didn't go out of his way to push anything through. He just let things happen at their natural pace. He had 2 targets. One target he hit anyway, just passively. The other target, he just missed it. It was just below it. What he discovered was that absolutely nothing happened. Nobody cared. Nobody even noticed. So often what happens when people are afraid of failing is they never test what happens if they do. And so they never find out. And so that fear is like an invisible force that adds more pressure, that puts more pressure on you. And the thing to always remember is, who cares? Nobody cares if you fail. Nobody cares enough about you to judge you. The people who really care about you, your friends and your family, are not judging you. They just like spending time with you. And if they could spend more time with you, then that would be a good thing. So and there's an important point for managers here in recognizing the signs of stress. So if you're a manager, or even if you have people around you in an office who you want to take an interest in their well-being, then it's important to learn how to recognize the signs of stress, because I know you might sit there thinking, well, it's all very well saying who cares, nobody cares, but my boss cares. I have to keep my customers happy. The people around me, I have to keep my job, and my family, that they care. Well, actually, they care about you. They don't care about whether you do one more bit of work or get one more project finished before you go home for the evening. If you are stressed, and if your staff around you are stressed, you're running on empty. It's a time bomb waiting to go off, because what's happening is, if people are working a little bit later in the office, if people are taking work home with them, people are doing a bit of work on the weekends, taking more on, starting to work through their lunch breaks and so on, what that's tapping into is what's called discretionary effort. This is the effort that employees give that's over and above what's in their contract of employment. The important point about discretionary effort is that employees don't have to give it, but they give it because they're interested, they're engaged, they care, and because it's a one-off. So there's one thing that you have to get done before Friday afternoon. And so somebody might say, well, they might work a little bit later to get that done because they know it's important, and because they know there's a sense of give and take. That if they come in a little bit late on Monday, they have to take a longer lunch break to pop to the bank, then that's okay, it's give and take. The problem is when it's just take, people will start to adjust their working routines, their working schedules to accommodate that. But they can't carry on doing that forever. They can't carry on giving you more of their personal time. There's a limit to that. And the limit comes when they hit the barrier where they get ill, or somebody in their family gets ill, and suddenly they've gone. So what they've been giving you, instead of 8 hours a day, is maybe 9 or 10 or 11 hours a day of work. And then suddenly that's gone down to 0, because now they're off sick with maybe some stress-related illness. So the problem with discretionary effort is you can't rely on it. People aren't contracted to give it to you. And therefore it's in your interests to be mindful of your employees' well-being and their mental health and their stress and anxiety. Because what that gives you is more leeway when you do have a genuine issue, when you do have a genuine emergency, and you do need to call upon that discretionary effort. And people are willing to do that. They're willing to help you because they know it's a matter of give and take. Workload does not equate to pressure. People can be busy but not be stressed. And the key is that as a manager, you're giving them the means and the resources to produce what you're asking them to do. If you restrict or you take away those means and resources, the result is almost guaranteed to be stress for the employees. So how to recognise the signs of stress in the workplace? It's quite straightforward, but the most difficult thing that you've actually got to do is pay attention to people. Because one of the most obvious signs of stress is a change in behaviour. So for example, someone might start working much longer or much shorter hours. They might start to skip lunch or breaks. They might drink more coffee. They might smoke more. They might eat more snacks at their desks. So when you notice a change in this, a change in somebody's pattern of behaviour, that's a sign of stress. And that's one of the things that doctors look out for. You might notice they become more irritable, more short-tempered. You might notice they withdraw more, they become more quiet, isolated, and they start to work from home more or start to work in a quiet corner of the office or go into a meeting room or something like that. If it's a one-off thing, like they've got to write a report and they just want to get some quiet time to focus on that, perhaps nothing to be concerned about. But if you start to see a change in these long-term patterns of behaviour, then that's something to notice, something to be aware of. Fundamentally, what all of these are is either a change in that process of self-medication that I mentioned earlier, and it's the initiation of what we all have, all animals share, which is our response to fear, our response to stress. You might think of that as the fight or flight response. More correctly, it's freeze, flight or fight. The first thing that we'll do under stress is freeze, stop, do nothing. If that doesn't work, we'll run away, hide, get away from, distance ourselves. And if that doesn't work, we'll fight, get aggressive. So for example, if you see somebody in the office getting short-tempered and irritable, they've already been through those first two stages of the stress response cycle, and you probably haven't noticed those. But it's never too late to intervene. Stress is like a filter, it's like a blind that we pull down over our view of the world. It's like a lens that we look through. We can't see it. We don't know that we're stressed. Other people know that you're stressed. So if your friends or your family have ever commented on these kinds of changes in behaviour, for example, you're getting more snappy or irritable, or you're changing your eating or your sleeping habits, and other people have commented on it, and you don't think you're stressed. You say, no, I'm fine, I can cope, I can manage, I'm just going through a busy period. Stop and listen to their feedback. It's valuable, it's important. Other people will recognise changes in our behaviour long before we do. And so what you can do as a manager is offer feedback, offer support, most importantly, take it seriously. If you don't, you risk a sudden withdrawal of that engagement when the person wakes up one Monday morning and thinks, I can't do this anymore. And that's it. That's much more dangerous than being able to support and manage people through the gradual ups and downs that we all experience in life. When you're giving feedback to somebody on stress, there are certain things that you can do to make it easier, to make it more likely that you'll be able to engage with them and provide them with the help and the support that they need. Often what you'll hear people saying in the office is, you look stressed, or you seem to be struggling, I think you're taking too much on, you should take some time off. Giving people advice, making judgments, these sorts of statements, while they might be well-intentioned, are actually counterproductive. Because if you're making a statement that's projecting your judgment onto somebody else, like you look stressed, who wants to hear that? You don't want to hear that, so you'll reject it. It actually compounds the stress, and now what you've done is you've closed off the channel for that feedback, so now it's just going to get worse. You might ask some of their colleagues to have a word with them. That's not helping either, because as manager you need to be seen to be taking responsibility and taking an interest, not abdicating that to somebody else to do. So these would not be helpful ways of giving somebody feedback on stress. So what would be helpful ways? That's what you're really interested in, isn't it? The first thing is to point out what you've noticed, what's changed, because this is objective. They can't, if somebody's sitting there with a chocolate bar in their hands, they can't argue that they do in fact have a chocolate bar in their hands. The subjective issue is, what does it mean? Is it a one-off? Is it a sign of self-medication? Is it a sign of stress? So The feedback is, I notice you seem to be doing more or less of something. I notice you seem to be working through your lunch breaks more often, for example. And I'm concerned that you might be feeling under pressure. So now you're saying what your intention is. You're saying, I've noticed this, and my intention is, what I've noticed, what I feel, what I have deduced from that is, I'm concerned that you might be feeling under pressure. And I wondered how I can support you better. So again, you're stating your intention. You're not making a judgment, you're stating your intention. Because I want to make sure that you're okay, and what can I do to help you? Not, is there anything I can do to help you? Is there any way that I can help? Is there anything that you need? Because the answer will be no. What can I do to help you? It presupposes there is something. It gets them to think, gets them to engage in the conversation. So for example, I noticed that you seem to be staying later in the office for the past few nights. I noticed that you've missed your lunch break twice or 3 times already this week. I noticed that you're starting to take more work home with you. I noticed that you've been working from home more often. And I want to help you. So it's very important to state your intention. You're not saying, for example, I notice you're staying later in the office and that's a bad thing, I'm judging you, I'm going to make you do something that you don't want to do. I want to help you. So be objective about what you've noticed, the change in behaviour, state your intention and ask, what can I do to help you? So the second learning objective, was about managing demands on your time. Time is something that you can't manage. We talk about it like we can. You can even go on time management courses, but of course you can't manage time. It passes at the same rate no matter what you do. What you can do is you can choose what to do with the time that's available. You can choose your priorities. There is always more to do in a day than you have time for, and so you always prioritise. You always have hopes and dreams, plans, even chores, activities, things you put off until the weekend. So you're used to making priorities. The problem is when you're stressed, you lose that perspective, you lose that ability to decide what's the most valuable priority for you. The most important thing, I think, is keeping control of that, choosing your priorities, of prioritising your own workload, because you can guarantee that if you don't prioritise what's important to you, if you don't choose what you want to do with your time, you can guarantee somebody else will. And I think that's probably not what you want. So if you find yourself saying yes to things at work, maybe at home as well, what's happening is you're giving your time away for free. If somebody asks you to do something for them and you say yes automatically, you're not qualifying that, you're not putting any kind of criteria or measurement on that. So you're just giving away your time for free, as if it's worthless, as if your time is available for anybody to use, for whatever they want to do with it. Would you give away your money as easily? I doubt it. So you've got to treat your time as a limited resource that's valuable. It's valuable for you. And if it's valuable for you, and if other people are asking you to give them your time, then your time must be valuable for them. And if your time is valuable for them, there must be a price attached to it somehow. So if you ever find yourself in the situation in the office where what you really want to say is no, but the feeling of saying no creates conflict. You think you get into trouble, or the other person won't like you, or now you'll feel guilty, and that conflict builds up inside of you and that creates stress. So what you actually say is yes. Or maybe you say, oh, I'm really busy, and oh, I don't know, and I'll try, and oh, all right then. And if you say that, what the other person hears is yes, because they don't care about how busy you are. They don't care about what other things you've got to do or how stressed you are. They just heard you say yes, so that's it, they're happy. So the problem fundamentally is caused by a faulty belief that you have that when you're asked if you can deliver something, do some work, finish something off by the end of the day, take on some extra responsibility, the faulty belief is that you think there are only 2 options, which are yes and no. Actually, if you've ever been on a negotiation skills course, you'll know that one of the most important things we do when we're negotiating is we create more options. Because if we've only got the option to say yes or no, then take it or leave it. And we end up being pushed into a deal or an agreement that we're not happy with. So what we've got to do is create more options between yes and no, and in between yes and no, in that gap that we create, we can negotiate. So for example, somebody says to you in the office, can you do this for me? And you say, instead of saying no or yes, which creates the conflict, you say yes if. Sounds simple, right? Too good to be true. So for example, somebody says, can you get this report done for me by 5 o'clock today? And you say, yes, if you can get me all the information I need by 2 o'clock. Because as you know, if you've got to finish a report by the end of the day, it's not just writing the report, you've got to get information, you've got to phone people, you've got to get some data from some system or other. If they do that for you, then yeah, so if they do that for you by 2 o'clock, then you can get the report done by 5 o'clock, for example. You might say, yes, if you can speak to my boss and clear my diary for the rest of the day. Well, now they've got to do something in order to help you, not expect you to take on that pressure. They might say, can you get me this report finished by 5 o'clock today? You might say, yeah, if you can find someone to help me. Or yes, if you extend the deadline on this other work that I'm doing. Or even, yes, if you supply me with coffee on demand. Why not? The point is, the price that you put on your time doesn't matter, it's arbitrary, as all prices are arbitrary. What's important is you're saying, yes, I will help you, but my expertise, my help is valuable. And because it's valuable, it comes at a price. There's something that you have to do first. Now, a lot of people ask, well, is this practical? I can't do that in the office. It's ridiculous. I can't say no. I can't say yes if. It would never work. I can't tell my boss that I'm not going to do something. I can't say no to a customer. I can't negotiate with my manager. Well, of course you can. What you're really saying, if you say that, is you're afraid of the consequences of doing that. That's different to saying it won't work. And actually that's fine. If you don't want to do it, that's entirely up to you. You don't have to do it. You can continue compromising and putting more pressure on yourself and creating more stress for yourself. That's the realistic alternative. Fundamentally, people who value their time do not give it away for free. If your expertise is valuable, it comes at a price. You get to decide what that price is, and the other person gets to decide if they want to pay it. And they might say, sure, I'll get you a cup of coffee, or I'll order a pizza in for you because you're working late, or I'll get you a taxi because you've got to work late in the office and go home. Or I'll stay with you and entertain you and get you a pizza and get you a taxi home, or whatever it might be. The point is, you're saying, I am valuable, and therefore what I do for you has a price. Just like your employment contract. Your employment contract says you are valuable, and here's what we will give you in return for your valuable contribution to this business. It's just an extension of that. So, navigating conflict is another final thing that we're going to talk about. Cause of conflict is always that resources are limited, or a belief that resources are limited. They may or may not be. And actually, as we've talked about in negotiation, where the idea is that we create more options, we can always navigate and resolve conflict by creating more options. Simple way to resolve conflict is to have a bigger goal or a bigger plan or a bigger scope within which to negotiate and to solve problems and to figure things out. When people are limited in their thinking, then we create conflict because, as I said, we believe that resources are limited. So you can imagine a salesperson who believes that they've only got one customer and they're coming up to their month-end, year-end, whatever it might be, whatever period of time their sales target gets measured on, and they think they've only got one customer, will be more likely to concede more. They'll give away discounts, they'll give away more because they're afraid of losing that one customer. A salesperson who believes they have many customers or can always go out and prospect for more customers is much less likely to concede. They're much more likely to stay firm on price or the scope of the project, the scope of the deal, because they know that they have the power to say no. They can compromise a little bit. They want to win the client's business, but they don't have to. They're not dependent on it, and that's an important difference. So if we're trying to navigate conflict, if we're trying to navigate through a problem of limited resources, how can we have both? How can we create the options that both people want? How do we create more resources? So, for example, workplace conflict is often caused by one person making a promise or a commitment to something that they have no authority to commit to. So a salesperson might promise some scope of a project or something, a delivery date or something like that they don't have the authority to commit to. Now they expect other people within the business to pull out all the stops, to bend the rules, to meet the commitment they've made to the customer. So in this, if you ever find yourself in this kind of situation, your options are limited to, you say yes, and you create conflict for yourself, you bend the rules, you maybe cause compromises for other customers or other people within the business, or you say no, which creates conflict for them, because you don't want to say no, you don't want them to not like you, you don't want them to reject you, you don't want to feel guilty or bad about that. You can defer it to your boss, and your boss will decide one way or the other, then it's out of your hands, it's not your responsibility. But in general, if you're experiencing that kind of conflict in the workplace, where other people are expecting you to honour commitments that they've made that were not in their authority to do, then what you can do is you can enjoy recognising that external conflict between you and this other person is actually a sign of your self-respect. Because if you give in, what you're doing is you're compromising your own values, you're compromising your own worth, your own value to the business, you're compromising the job that you signed up to do. And that's just not fair. When you externalise that conflict, when you say, I don't care what you've promised the customer, you had no authority to do that, this is the way that it's got to be, and you've got to go back and reset the customer's expectations. That may sound harsh, it may sound impossible, we don't want to lose the customer, but you lose customers every day, but you don't notice. You lose customers every day where customers are shopping around or they're going to other providers at the end of their year or 2 years or whatever it might be. You're already losing customers, but for the wrong reasons. Lose customers for the right reasons, because you're running your business and doing your job in the way that you signed up to according to the values and the strategy of the organisation. Fundamentally, that kind of conflict is caused by your self-respect being inconvenient for other people. How is that a bad thing exactly? Now, if you're a manager and you see conflict amongst your staff, again, you can see that the conflict is a sign of restricted resources or limited resources. Here's another way of thinking, if you're a manager looking at two people who are in conflict. Conflict is actually a sign of agreement. Now, I know that sounds strange, so bear with me. Because what happens is the two people involved in the conflict are agreeing on the higher purpose, the higher aim or objective. What they're disagreeing on is how to achieve that. So they're disagreeing about how or why or when or how much or what compromises have to be made or the best solution to a problem. But what they both agree on is the problem has to be solved. So if you're a manager observing this kind of conflict between people in the office, there's a very simple series of steps that you can follow to resolve this. So the first thing to do is to understand what that higher purpose is that they're both trying to achieve. What is the thing that they're both trying to do but they're disagreeing on how to do it? So ask them to acknowledge what it is that they're each aiming for and what the higher purpose of that is. And this may sound strange, but ask them to list the merits of each other's suggestions. So you get them to see it from the other person's point of view. Not to acknowledge it, not to accept that it's true or valid, but just to accept that the other person has a different perspective and there are some merits from their point of view. Thirdly, get them to create a third option. Get them to create an option that is neither of what they're both defending, the position that they're both defending or the approach that each of them is advocating. Get them to create a third option and ask them to work together to make that third option happen and ask them to share their creative new idea, because this conflict isn't new. This conflict is caused by an issue that's happened before and it will happen again. So if they've come up with a third option, some compromise, some new idea that they haven't thought of before, some new way of looking at the situation, some new angle, some new perspective, get them to share that with other people, share that with colleagues. Now they feel good about the fact that they've resolved this issue that had been a conflict. So for example, the customer wants the lowest price and the underwriter wants the highest price. I mean, that's always the case. You know, the person manufacturing or selling the product or providing the service wants the highest price for it, the customer wants to pay the lowest price. The customer's going to shop around. The underwriter or the broker or the organisation providing the service is going to have lots of customers to choose from. So there's always a choice within the marketplace. But fundamentally, price might be an issue that we get stuck on. What we both want actually is value. What we both want is customer value. Our customers want service providers who are going to stay in business for a long time and are going to provide a varied and a rich scope of services. And service providers want customers who are good and loyal and happy and who don't cost us a lot of money after the decision's been made. So a new option, for example, might be to change the scope of the agreement or change the wording for the customer. So coming up with a way where actually we can both create more value, because actually that's what we both want. So just to give you a quick recap of what you've been watching in this video, how to resolve stress and understanding that stress is the result of opposing forces, and those opposing forces are caused and created by you, not by your workload, and therefore you have the power to change them, to break that cycle of stress and self-medication, to recognize it in yourself, recognize it in other people and help them to do the same. To understand that if you're trying to prove something, nobody cares. Nobody's interested, nobody's judging you. They just want you to be you. They just want you to do what you're paid to do, because that's how the organisation's designed, for everybody just to do what they are there to do and to feel good while you're doing it, because that makes you happier, more productive, and it means you'll live longer. And I think that's probably what you want in the long run. Secondly, we talked about valuing your time. Your time is valuable, it therefore comes at a price. That price is arbitrary. The issue is the other person willing to pay that? Are they willing to do what they need to do to help you do what they're asking from you? And if you are valuable, and you must be because you have a contract of employment, you get paid, you are valued, then there's nothing wrong with you continuing to negotiate and renegotiate that value on a daily basis for things that are out of the ordinary. And enjoy conflict. It's a sign of your self-respect being inconvenient for other people. And we can resolve conflict easily by understanding what's the higher purpose that we're both trying to achieve and how can we come up with new ways of doing that. So the learning outcomes from this video have been to understand the long and short-term effects of stress on you and the people around you, to manage conflicts and demands on your time more easily, and to navigate workplace conflict to deliver win-win outcomes. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.